I'm Charles Tripp. I'm Professor Emeritus of Politics of Middle East and North Africa at the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. Welcome to my exp. So if one thinks about revolutions across Middle Eastern and North African history, one of the things that often gets written out of the record or forgotten about is the fact that many of these countries were undergoing revolutionary changes early in the 19th century and in the mid-19th century. And in many ways, European colonial intervention at the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th, disrupted that process of indigenous revolutionary change, where in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Iran, the autocrats were being questioned and the revolutions were beginning to simmer throughout the educated and the middle classes, and indeed in many of the rural areas as well. When the Europeans intervened, often in the pretext of suppressing the disorder associated with these revolutions, then it was a case of arrested development. The Europeans intervened often to prop up the old creaking dynastic ruling families of these countries, and in doing so froze political development and then imposed their own pace upon it, rather unjustly, therefore accusing the peoples of the Middle East and North Africa of being unready for political development, which of course they'd been very ready for, but had had it disrupted by European intervention. The revolutionary impulse, which of course you could say exists in all societies, particularly in the face of oppressive and unrepresentative power, became targeted much more towards anti-colonial movements and against the elites who had collaborated with the colonial powers to retain their own dynastic thrones. So revolution begins to be a feature of the early 20th century. The early anti-colonial revolutions in Egypt in 1919, in Iraq in 1920, in Palestine in the 20s and 30s were all suppressed violently by the colonial authorities. And in that sense, therefore, it again reinforced the dependence of those who ruled upon colonial power, which is, of course, as the colonial powers wished it to be. They wanted to reinforce for the dynasties that they had no independent power of their own. What this meant, of course, is that after the Second World War, when the European empires began to retreat from the region of Middle East and North Africa, then the dynasties and the systems of power that had depended upon them for their authority and for their military might began to be vulnerable to revolutionary movements. And that's when you begin to see in the 50s and 60s the uprisings and revolutions across much of the Middle East and North Africa in the name of not only national liberation, but liberation from conservative, reactionary regimes that had ruled dictatorially with the help of colonial power. One of the features of the 20th century across the region was the disappointment that attended the kinds of revolutions that erupted after the European powers had withdrawn. These are the revolutions that overthrew the monarchy in Egypt, that overthrew the monarchy in Iraq, that overthrew the old republic in Syria. And these were revolutions which had a lot of popular backing in the sense that people thought it was going to be a way in which new possibilities, new forms of self-determination, and new democracies might emerge. But one of the sinister features of all of the revolutions is that the military officers of the military establishment played a very powerful role in all of them. And therefore, it colored the kinds of regimes and the kind of politics that then developed thereafter in Egypt, in Syria, in Iraq, and elsewhere. What one sees from really the 1950s, 60s onwards is a growing entrenchment of military rule, authoritarian rule, and a disturbing use of repression in the name of progress. In many senses, and this goes back to the old idea of development, many of these outfits were themselves, you could say, seduced by a sense of development in which they, like the European powers before them, had the sole key to how to develop the countries. So you had an emergence of vanguardist parties, the Ba'ath Party, particularly in Syria and Iraq, but equally the Nasserist parties, a Nasserist party in Egypt. All of them felt that they knew better than the people and that the people should be guided by them. So this is a recipe for a very authoritarian rule from top down rather than from bottom up. And inevitably, you begin to see forms of resistance against this kind of oppression throughout the region at different times in different places. So in Iraq, you have an increasing resistance, armed resistance in the name of Kurdish nationalism in the north of the country, as the Kurds realized that self-determination didn't seem to apply to them, but brought them under the control of Baghdad and the Arab regime. But more importantly, that they had no say in an authoritarian dictatorial system.